Good morning on this wonderful wintry day. This is the State of Greater Western New York report, and what are we going to learn about today? We're going to learn about the Holland Land Trust. Yeah, how half of our region got settled in a rather interesting way. That's right, you're going to hear it all today on this week's version of the State of Greater Western New York report, which is brought to you by... Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard. The Mendon Honeoye Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York report, Chris Carosa. Hi there, and good morning, and welcome to today's episode of the State of Greater Western New York report. I'm Chris Carosa. With me today is Ryan Duffy. He's the executive director of the Genesee Land Trust Museum in Batavia, New York. Ryan, how are we doing this morning?
We're doing pretty well, just surviving the snow.
That's right. This morning, it's the afternoon. I guess I'm kind of discombobulated by all this snow out there. But hey, you're going to tell us some really fascinating things about the early growth of the Greater Western New York region and maybe how people can experience some of that history today. Let's start off just a little bit about yourself and how you ended up getting to where you are. I mean, how does one become the executive director of the Holland Land Trust Museum?
Well, my story to getting to this point took some turns, but I grew up a person interested in history basically my entire life, and realized I was not much in the classroom in terms of teaching, so I wanted to work with history, so I pursued education and then a career in what they call public history or museum studies, and went from St. Bonaventure out to grad school in Ohio, and then eventually back here to Western New York, and was introduced to this position and gave it a whirl, and I've been here now 5 years. So it's what I've always wanted to do, at least in the field, and it's kind of amazing that I get to do it now.
So I have to. I mean, we're going to get into the history in a second, but I'm kind of always fascinated about how people land where they land and what their experiences are. So when you first got to the museum, what was the thing that struck you? What was the thing that was most, inspiring or curiosity seeking that was part of that museum?
Well, when I got the job, I knew absolutely nothing really about what was here, so it was all brand new from that sense. But once I started learning about what was here, it was really the impact that this spot had on where we all live. And really, we call Batavia the birthplace of Western New York, and it is pretty much true in many senses. So, how all the land where I've lived in my entire life basically was kind of sold from this spot. So it was kind of just overwhelming in that sense, that the impact that it had on our area.
So let's talk a little bit about that history. The Holland Land Trust was actually the second land agent that came into the Greater Western New York region, the first being Phelps and Gorham. So how did the Holland Land Trust come to be, and what is the Holland and the Holland? Is it really foreign owners that really started this whole thing in Western New York?
Yeah, so the history of the Holland Land Company, it piggybacks off of the Phelps Gorham purchase, where the Phelps Gorham failed. Basically, the Holland Land Company filled that void, and the Holland Land Company was from Holland, from the Netherlands, so they were Dutch. And actually, out of all of them that were involved in it, none of them ever even came to the area where they purchased land. It was actually 6 banking families that got together to get into land speculation, and they found some open spaces here in Western New York.
So what was the time frame of this? When did this all start? So just to give people a sense, we know that Western New York as a region was formed through the Treaty of Hartford on December 16th, 1786. In the, I think it was 89 or something. Shortly thereafter, they formed Ontario County, and that's when Phelps and Gorham came in the early 1790s. What year did the Holland Land Company come onto the scene, and really how long did it last? How long did it take them to sell all the land in the western half of the greater Western New York region?
So the Holland Land Company becomes involved in late 1792. They purchase, or they're in negotiations with Robert Morris, who basically took over what was left over from Phelps and Gorham. And their negotiations basically lasted until 1793. And at that time, they had struck a deal, but the process wasn't over. It doesn't actually exchange hands formally until the Treaty of Big Tree in 1797, which involved the Senecas, and that officially transferred the deed over. And the land company, from that point on, they hired Joseph Ellicott right after the treaty is signed, and he completes the survey in 1800, so it takes him 3 years to complete the survey. Then they start selling the land almost immediately. So from 1800, and from the records we have here, I see sales into about 1845. But by 1837, the land company was starting to sell off assets and looking to move out, but they were around until 1845.
Now, was the land only sold through the office of Batavia, or did they start elsewhere and maybe have some branch offices in other regions in the greater Western New York area?
So it wasn't just in Batavia. In fact, Ellicott makes his first sales in Buffalo, where he ends up after completing the survey. So that's 1800. Then he winters at the Asa Ransom House, or Tavern at the time, which is in Clarence today, before he finally makes his way to Batavia. And actually, the first office in Batavia was in his home, which he built, would be across the street from where the current building is. And that is where most of the land was sold until 1815, when the main office here was built. But as the county started to separate out of what was known as Genesee County, the whole thing, offices were set up. There was one in Buffalo, there was one in Lockport, Mayville, Ellicottville. So they had branch offices as well once the counties did come about.
The idea of, and that was James Ellicott that we had here on the screen, a picture of him. Where
Joseph
did he
Ellicott.
Oh, I'm sorry, Joseph. Where did he come from?
He grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and eventually the family moved to Maryland. And there's actually a place called Ellicott Mills, Maryland, where the family settled. So he was down in that area, and eventually, after completing this job, was hired as the agent here in Batavia, so actually moved up permanently here to Western New York. And actually, several of his siblings actually followed him up here and settled in either Batavia, some in Williamsville, or Buffalo.
So as we move along now, at what point did he? I guess at what point did the Holland Land Office, which is where the museum is located, at what point did that end its reign, I guess, as a land office, and what did it become after it was a land office?
So the land company, from all we can tell, 1845 is the last any sort of record we have them dealing here in Batavia. And there's the building right there. So after that, it was actually still continued on as a land office until 1860 by various companies that had bought out the Holland Land Company assets. And then from 1860 to 1880, it was actually a school. It was Mrs. Bryan's Seminary, School for Girls. This was their classroom. They lived and resided in the Ellicott Mansion, which was across the street, but this was their classroom, and they especially loved it for their music classes because the stone walls kept out a lot of noise from the street, including phone calls. But then from 1880 to 1888, it was actually a church. it was the Church for the Free Methodist group here in Batavia, and they made some changes to the interior of the building. And then from 1888 to 1893, it was actually an apartment building, though we're not sure if anybody actually lived there. And then in 1893, the Holland Purchase Historical Society was created and bought the building to create it into a museum, which opened up the following year. So essentially from 1894 until today, we've been a museum, though there have been some breaks as other organizations use the building. But the Historical Society still exists today, still runs the museum.
Well, we'll talk more about the museum after the break, but before we get there, let's talk a little bit more about history and maybe some beyond the Holland Land Company. What are some other interesting historical facts around the Batavia area, or even the area? Let's call it the original Genesee County, which is again that everything west of the Genesee River.
So with the original Genesee County, basically from 1800 to 1841, it got split up from one county to 8 counties. But our original history, Batavia being founded 1801 to 1802 by Joseph Ellicott, and it quickly became a bustling town on a lot of the major roads that run through western New York. And that's why it's actually here on the bend in the Tonawanda Creek, but also at the meeting of what we have Route 5, Route 33, Route 98, Route 63. We have a lot of major roads coming through Batavia, but they all started out as major trails, and that's why Ellicott decided to settle here. Ellicott is really our first famous resident. He was the resident agent here in Batavia until 1821, and really you could call him the father of Western New York because it's from his designs that a lot of things are created. And for instance, during his survey, he was also the first person to measure the height of Niagara Falls, and he also laid out the early village of Buffalo and was the person to come up with the 12-inch ruler. So we're even the home of the 12-inch ruler.
That's kind of interesting. Do you have any stories about some of the early settlers that came, not necessarily specific people, but what was the transaction process like? How did they pay for the land? Did Ellicott do anything creative to draw people in? And what sort of competition did he face? Were there other places that people could go to settle besides Western New York?
So really the process could go case by case basis. Most of the settlers that bought land here from the land company were coming from New England. So they actually had a regional office in Vermont that was sort of the first stopping off point for people trying to come to Western New York, as they would make their initial thoughts done there before eventually coming here. And Ellicott had to be very creative because originally the land company wanted to sell things off quickly to large investors, and those just were not happening. You had people buying more on the 100 acres instead of the thousands of acres at a time. So Ellicott was actually very lenient in terms of his collection policies. A down payment could be as little as 25 cents. And the average price per acre was roughly $2.50, though that obviously fluctuated depending on where you were. And he would even take livestock in some cases as a down payment. And they also would give land to people in order to work it, so they could stay on the land, but they had to make improvements. And they would work for the land company, improving a plot, and then once that was improved, they would move on to another area. And they did this in order to be able to raise the price for the land. If trees have been cleared, if there was already fields there that could be used. So there were creative measures. The land company also donated land for the Erie Canal. Now, it wasn't land that the canal eventually went through, but they gave it to New York State so they could sell it and help pay for the Erie Canal, which helped bring in more settlers. In terms of competition, this is at the time in the first decade or so after the American Revolution, and the wide open spaces past the Appalachian Mountains were very attractive to a lot of people. So it wasn't just Western New York. In fact, the land company also made a purchase in Western Pennsylvania, which was not as successful. But then eventually you have the Northwest Ordinance, which opens up the Midwest. And a lot of people that end up in Michigan and Ohio and out farther west make stops here in Batavia or Western New York and settle for a while before moving farther west. So originally, Western New York was the western frontier, but it quickly becomes a stopping point going farther west.
We like to call Western New York America's first frontier. So, uh, Ryan, this is actually pretty fascinating, and I'm going to get to maybe how you know all this stuff. I mean, at the museum. But first, we're going to take a. Actually, before we take a break, I want to tell our listeners and watchers, if you want to ask a question, just go to your chat panel there and write your question down, and I'll relay it over to Ryan, and we can see what he has to say. You could ask him about anything that we've talked about or about the museum, and I'm sure he'll be happy to say something. We'll be right back after this message. Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com. Welcome back to the State of Greater Western New York Report. I'm Chris Carosa, and with me today is Ryan Duffy. He is the Executive Director of the the Holland Land Trust Museum. So tell us about the information that you have there. How did you learn all these facts that you just spouted out in the first part of the show? Are there archives there or other source material that at least you can look at, and maybe other historians?
So we have our own research library here, which has a good deal of the information that I just recited to everyone, and that's really where I learned most of it. But we do have some original documents here. We have actually all the original ledgers for Erie County. So we actually, for at least one county, we can trace back the land purchases all the way to 1800. And we've collected resources from other areas and interact with other museums that help fill in the pieces. Because there are documents from the land company spread out, not even just New York State, but other places. And we try to interact with those other institutions to fill in the gaps where we're missing things. But there's been quite a bit written about the land company really since even the 19th century. So there's quite a bit of a wealth of information to draw upon.
So tell us a little bit about the museum itself. Take us a little kind of like a virtual walkthrough of what people see when they go into the museum.
All right. So we are not only the Holland Land Office Museum, but we are also the museum for Genesee County. So we don't only talk about Ellicot and his accomplishments here with the early development, but we cover as much of the history of the county as we possibly can. So we have 5 rooms in total at the museum. 3 are located in the original building, plus we have 2 wings that have been added on in the past 50 years. We have a room dedicated exclusively to the story that we've been talking about, and you can see all sorts of artifacts and documents about that, including portraits of most of the Ellicott family, especially the ones that came here to West New York, and you can see a few of them there. We have some pieces from the Ellicott family, as well as Robert Morris, who actually sold the land to the land company, original deeds and land transcripts that were signed by the land company members. Sorry.
This is a picture of the land office room in the museum that you're seeing right now.
Yes, and this is a room we actually just recently redid, so it's our newest gem at the museum. But we also have rooms on pioneer life. We call it the Pioneer Kitchen, which is right there, in some of the early industry in Genesee County. Then we have a rotating room that has right now Native American items and even prehistoric items. We have some mastodon bones that were uncovered in Batavia. And then we have a whole wing dedicated to the military history of Genesee County, and we have quite a few individuals that made a major impact in the military history of the United States that come from Genesee County. Probably our most famous is Emory Upton, who was a general in the Civil War and responsible for the reorganization of the United States Army. There's Emory right there. And so we have quite a few of his personal artifacts. We also have a Medal of Honor that was won by a soldier from the Civil War from Genesee County. His name is Charles Rand. And there he is. He's not only a Medal of Honor winner, but he's also called the first volunteer of the Civil War. So we have several things from his life. We also have items from Ely Parker, who was a Seneca chief, but also served on General Grant's staff during the Civil War and served as the head of the Bureau of Indian Affairs under Grant. But we also have items in terms of the military stretching from the Revolutionary War all the way up to the post-Vietnam era. So we cover essentially the entire breadth of American military conflict in one room. But everything that we have here is connected to a person from Genesee County, either made, used, or owned. So it's all locally based in terms of our stories. And then our final room, we call it the East Wing, but it's also our event space. But we have items there from our most famous in terms of industrial family, the Richmonds. That's Dean Richmond there, and he was actually the president of the New York Central Railroad and a very wealthy individual during the mid 19th century. So we have several objects from his wife, his wife Mary, who was actually the first president of our historical society. So we have several things from them, and their beautiful home, the Richmond Mansion, which does not exist anymore, but we have been able to preserve a couple of things from it that we have on display, along with other pieces from Batavia's history, including industrial, agricultural. There are several big factories here in Batavia. We talk about Wired Plow and Johnston Harvester, which made most of the farming equipment used in Western New York. So we cover a lot of different topics, and we try to change it every few months or so. So there's always something new to see when coming through the museum.
So tell us about how people can go to the museum. Where is it located? What's the quickest way that they can get there, and can they park somewhere around there? Does it cost money to go in? That sort of thing.
Sure. So the museum is located in Batavia at 131 West Main Street. So we're right on Route 5, actually, Main Street here in Batavia. So not actually that hard to get to when coming from either east, west, north, or south. If you're taking the throughway, we're right near the exit, actually, off at Batavia. Take the exit and take a left, and we're right there. In terms of parking, we have our own parking lot, so you never have to worry about that. And we're probably one of the few places with a parking lot on Main Street. So it's definitely, you can even park here at the museum and check out a lot of other things in Batavia after checking out the museum. Our hours are Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 4. And in terms of admission, it is $5 for adults, $3 for seniors, veterans, and students, $1 for children, and $10 for a family, which is 2 adults and 2 children.
I did have one question, but before I get to that, are there any sort of activities or events that you have coming up at the museum?
Yes, we're working on a full schedule of events. We have a monthly trivia night here, which is always the second Thursday. So the one for February is next Thursday, and it's on Thomas Edison, but we pick a different historical theme for every month, usually based off of something that happened in that month. And so that is at 7 o'clock on the Thursdays, and it's a nice fun time to test your knowledge on different things and for people to get angry with me with the questions I pick. So, but it's always a fun time. Trivia seems to be something people really enjoy, and we tried to tap into that market. We also have a guest speaker series. We have monthly or a couple every month with speakers from around Western New York and sometimes farther afield to talk about particular topics. We have a lot coming up in terms of the spring and summer months and into the fall, but we have different topics. There's probably about 20 already booked now throughout the rest of the year. We're working on doing more. We also have a morning presentation group, which is the fourth Thursday of every month. It's called Java with Joe E, a little play off our man Joe Ellicott there. And actually, we have one coming up for February. It's Michael Eula, who is our county historian here in Genesee County, and he's going to talk about female slaves and poor women in the 19th century in Genesee County and sort of the stories that revolve around them. But we're, again, working on adding future ones for that for the rest of the year. On top of that, we have a summer kids program. It's called History Heroes. We do ghost walks. We have done antique shows in the past, though with this current situation, haven't been able to do that, but we're working to get those back in place. We do concerts here throughout the year. We have a St. Patrick's Day concert every year, usually around St. Patrick's Day. And we also have a Christmas tree event called Wonderland of Trees, which is very popular here with decorated trees from around the community. So we have our fingers in a lot of different events, and we're always working to make it more of a community space and tap into more than just telling the history.
So, with regards to the speakers, are those all in-person events, or are they also available through Zoom? How might people
we do a hybrid where we try to get them in person as much as we can because it's just always more interesting, but we make them available via Zoom as well for those who can't make it here.
How do people find out about it? Do they go to your website or
the best place to always go is our website, hollandlandoffice.com. We keep it as updated as we possibly can with everything going on, but we also have a Facebook page. Just search Holland Land Office Museum and it'll all come up, and everything's posted there as well. You can call us and ask questions. I'll be happy to tell you everything. Number is 585-343-4727, or you can email us, hollandlandoffice@gmail.com. But really the best way is to become a member of the museum, as we send out weekly email notifications as well as our quarterly newsletter. And that can be as inexpensive as $25 for the year. And we'll keep you up to date on everything, plus get you free admission into the museum and discounts to events and such. So it's definitely a worthwhile venture if you're interested in what's going on here at the museum.
Excellent. We did have one question. We don't have a lot of time left, but if you could answer it quickly, what was Batavia's role in the War of 1812? That's an odd question,
okay.
But maybe they know what they're looking for.
Well, I'll answer as quickly as possible. So after the burning of Buffalo, a lot of the refugees and the Army personnel actually ended up here in Batavia. And the Joseph Ellicott home actually became the headquarters for the Army over the winter between 1813 and 1814. Luckily, the British never pushed any farther, so there was no battle, though they prepared for battle. And in preparation, Ellicott actually transferred all the documents from the land company east of the Genesee for further protection. And they wintered here essentially for a while, and even Winfield Scott actually was treated for wounds from Lundy's Lane here in Batavia. So that's Batavia's role in the War of 1812.
Well, thank you very much, Ryan, and thank you all for watching today's show. It's been very interesting, and if you'd like to be a member of the live audience where you too can ask questions, then feel free to go to our website, stateof.greaterwesternnewyork.com, and there's a little sign-up form there, and every Thursday morning you'll get the free invitation to the link on how to see the show live, and you too can ask questions. So once again, Ryan, thank you very much. We'll definitely be talking to you later because I know that there's lots more interesting things that you can tell us about Genesee County and also the Holland Land Trust or Holland Land Company. All right, so we'll see everybody else next week here on the State of Greater Western New York Report. Bye-bye for now.